Black CEO gets kicked out, then stuns everyone with one sentence. A woman in a gold satin dress whispered something to her companion, both of them barely glancing at the man who had just stepped onto the deck. Elijah Maddox adjusted his cufflinks, onyx set in platinum, subtle but deliberate. He moved with the stillness of someone used to commanding boardrooms, not needing to speak loudly to be heard. His tailored navy suit was crisp, immaculate. His gait, calm. The kind of calm you cultivate when you've had to walk through fires just to be allowed in the room. He stood alone near the railing, eyes scanning the horizon, when the voice came. Sharp, brittle, unmistakably performative. "I'm sorry, sir. This area is for invited guests only." Elijah turned slowly. The hostess was tall, meticulously styled. Her icy blonde hair swept into a chignon that had been sprayed into immobility. She didn't smile. Her name tag read Camille, engraved in delicate gold script that didn't match her tone. "I am an invited guest," Elijah said, his voice level. There was no anger in it. No challenge. Just truth. Camille tilted her head, lips pursed in the way people do when they're preparing to be righteous. "Of course you are," she said, eyes scanning him again. "But I'm afraid I'll need to see your credentials." A few heads turned. Not many. Just enough for silence to settle like a fog. Elijah reached for his phone, not to prove himself, but because he already sensed where this was going. Before he could speak, Camille's voice cut through again, louder this time. "Security," she called, one manicured hand in the air. "We have someone who may have come aboard by mistake." It wasn't a scream. It didn't need to be. Her voice was a scalpel, precise, cutting, and meant to draw blood just beneath the skin. And still, no one intervened. He stood perfectly still as murmurs drifted among the guests. Their eyes skated over him like he was a glitch in their evening, not a man. Not the man, but Elijah? He just smoothed the edge of his lapel and waited. The yacht, grand and shimmering, suddenly felt too quiet. Except for Camille's voice slicing through the tension like a violin string wound too tight. "Sir," she insisted, gesturing now to two suited security guards making their way toward Elijah. "This is a private event. If you can't produce an invitation, I'll have to ask you to disembark." The word disembark hung there, deliberate and theatrical, as if she'd discovered a stowaway among the pearls and polo shirts. Elijah slowly turned to face the crowd behind her. Well-dressed guests sipped their wine and pretended not to listen. A man in a linen blazer gave a half-smile before looking down at his glass. A couple near the bar exchanged hushed words. No one stepped forward. No one ever did. Elijah's eyes returned to Camille. "I wasn't aware being black disqualified me from wearing a suit." The silence deepened. Even the band had quieted, the saxophonist lowering his instrument as though sensing the shift in air pressure. Camille's lips tightened. "This has nothing to do with..." But Elijah raised a hand, gentle, firm, final. "Let's not insult each other." The guard stopped just behind her, eyes flicking uncertainly between the hostess and the man they were now tasked with removing. "I'll ask you one more time," Camille said, voice brittle. "Do you have an invitation?" Elijah reached into his jacket pocket. Every eye on the deck was on him now, but he didn't pull out a ticket. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen once. Then he looked up, directly at Camille. "Call the owner," he said. She blinked. "Excuse me? You know the owner of this yacht. Call him. Or her. Or better yet," he turned slightly, eyes sweeping the stunned crowd. "Anyone here who's accepted funding from Maddox Global." It took a beat before the name registered. Maddox, as in Maddox Global Capital, the private equity firm behind half the startups represented at this elite networking gala. Elijah turned back to Camille, his tone still even. "I'm Elijah Maddox, the man who paid for tonight, who pays for more than a few of the suits standing here right now." Gasps. Real ones this time. And suddenly, all those averted eyes were locked on him. Camille's expression didn't falter right away. For a split second, she wore the look of someone still convinced they could control the spin, even as the car flipped. But then the murmurs started, soft, surprised, undeniable. "Elijah Maddox," a man near the bar whispered. "Wait, the investor?" From the far end of the deck, someone audibly dropped their glass. The shatter rang like punctuation. Elijah didn't move. He didn't need to. Camille, however, took a half-step back. "Mr. Maddox," she said quickly, the change in tone so sharp it scraped. "I apologize. I had no idea." "I know," Elijah interrupted, voice still calm but now lined with steel. "You didn't ask." He turned to the guards. "Thank you, gentlemen. You're dismissed." They hesitated, but something in his voice, the quiet authority of someone who signs more than just checks, made them nod and step away. Camille opened her mouth again, perhaps to recover, perhaps to pretend none of it happened. But Elijah raised a hand again. "Let's not pretend you didn't just try to erase me," he said, his voice louder now, projected not just toward her, but to the crowd watching. Publicly, without reason, without hesitation. No one moved. Even the saxophonist had lowered his horn and now stood holding it like a question mark. "You saw a black man standing alone and decided he didn't belong," Elijah continued, now slowly pacing across the teak deck. "No badge, no name tag, just skin you couldn't reconcile with status." Eyes darted, feet shifted, guilt spread like spilled wine. "But I belong here. Not because I signed a check, not because of the zeros in my account, but because I exist." He paused, and for the first time, people listened not because they were shocked, but because they were quiet enough to hear him. Camille's eyes darted left and right, searching the crowd for support that no longer existed. The same people who had silently co-signed her actions with their stillness were now frozen for different reasons. Shame, maybe, or the terror of being the next one called out. Elijah stood center deck now, no spotlight, but every eye fixed on him. "You didn't even ask my name," he said, quieter now, but clearer. "You just assumed I was an interruption to your evening, a problem to be handled." Camille swallowed, the gold chain around her neck trembling slightly with the movement. "I made a mistake," she said weakly. Elijah tilted his head. "No," he replied. "You made a decision, and everyone here watched you do it." That landed. A man in a charcoal jacket near the railing shifted uncomfortably, his face coloring. Someone behind him whispered something sharp, and a woman hissed, "Don't pretend you didn't hear her." A crack in the wall. Small but real. "I've walked into too many rooms where I had to explain myself to people who had already made up their minds," Elijah continued. "Rooms like this. And I used to stay quiet. Thought dignity meant swallowing the insult, smiling through it." He looked around again. But dignity is not silence. And self-respect is not invisibility. A few heads nodded, slowly, cautiously. Camille's voice returned, but it was thinner now. "I didn't mean to offend you." Elijah turned to face her directly. "That's the problem. You didn't mean anything. You just acted like I wasn't real until you were forced to see me." He stepped forward once, close enough for only her to hear the next words. "I see you now, too." Camille's face blanched, and around them, the crowd, finally, stirred. The air shifted, not with applause, not with outrage, but with that dense, heavy awareness that comes only after someone dares to say what everyone else pretended not to see. The luxury yacht hadn't moved, but something fundamental aboard had tilted, old balances disrupted, invisible rules exposed. Camille took a shaky breath. "Mr. Maddox, I truly..." He cut her off gently, not cruelly, not with anger, but with finality. "You don't need to apologize to me," he said, eyes scanning the guests. "Apologize to every black guest who's ever stepped into a space like this and felt unwelcome without anyone saying a word. Apologize to the people who watched this happen and said nothing until they heard my name." That struck something deeper than she expected. A woman near the dance floor looked down at her shoes. A man near the bar slowly set his drink down. Elijah's voice softened. "You thought your mistake was not knowing who I am." He paused, his eyes returning to hers. "But the real mistake was believing you had the right to decide who belongs." Camille's mouth opened slightly, maybe to protest, maybe to deflect, but no sound came. Whatever script she had rehearsed in her head didn't work in this moment. She turned to the crowd, hoping for a lifeline. None came. The man in the charcoal jacket stepped forward. "Mr. Maddox," he said, clearing his throat. "On behalf of the sponsors, I want to thank you for being here tonight. And for what you said. It was clumsy, And too late. But it was something. Elijah gave a slow nod. Not approval. Not forgiveness. Just acknowledgment. Then he looked at Camille one last time. I recommend you leave the event. It's clear you need time to reflect. It wasn't a request. And it didn't need to be. Camille stood still for a heartbeat, trapped not by anyone holding her back, but by the weight of her own unraveling authority. Then she turned and walked, heels clicking against the deck, disappearing down the staircase without another word. Camille's departure left a silence so thick it seemed to muffle the ocean breeze itself. Conversations didn't resume right away. The party hadn't crashed, exactly, it had sobered. Elijah returned to the railing where he'd first stood, taking in the horizon once again. This time, people watched him differently, not as a curiosity, but as a mirror. A black server carrying a tray of champagne passed by, hesitated, then leaned in and whispered, "Thank you." It was barely audible, but Elijah heard it. Their eyes met briefly. That was enough. He took a flute from the tray, not to toast, not to celebrate, but simply to remind himself that he was still standing, that he had chosen presence over performance, voice over silence. Behind him, the quartet slowly resumed. The saxophone's first notes were hesitant, like a bird testing its wings after a storm. Then the bass joined in, soft and steady. Conversation started again, but in lower tones, more deliberate. A young black couple approached him next, the man slightly nervous, the woman clutching her handbag like armor. "We weren't sure we should come tonight," she admitted. "Didn't think we'd fit in." "You fit wherever you decide to stand," Elijah said. "That's the part they don't want us to remember." They nodded, staying a moment longer than necessary, then fading back into the slowly regrouping crowd. Across the deck, Elijah noticed something else. The people who had stood in silence earlier now couldn't seem to meet his gaze. It wasn't guilt, not all of it. Some of it was embarrassment. Some of it was reckoning. And some of it, just maybe, was the beginning of listening. The rhythm of the evening tried to resume. The waitstaff refilled glasses. A few bold guests resumed dancing, half-heartedly. The laughter that returned was thinner, more measured, as though people had realized they were being watched by their own conscience. Elijah remained near the railing, not isolated, but apart. A quiet gravity surrounded him now, not forced, not performative, simply earned. From the crowd, an older white man in a tailored cream blazer slowly approached. His silver cufflinks gleamed in the low light, a practiced smile on his face. "Mr. Maddox," he began, extending a hand. That was powerful. Elijah took the hand, firm but cool. That wasn't a performance. The man nodded, chuckling awkwardly. No, of course not. I meant, well, what you said needed to be said. And, for what it's worth, I've always admired your work. Maddox Global is impressive." Elijah watched him for a moment. "And yet, you said nothing while I was being humiliated." The man's smile faltered. "Well, I wasn't sure." "You were," Elijah said gently. "You just weren't brave." The man's mouth opened, closed. Then he gave a small nod and walked away, shoulders stiffer than before. Not all confrontation had to be loud. Some of it lived in measured truths. Behind him, Elijah heard the DJ make a quiet transition to a mellow groove, something soulful, with a heartbeat that matched the shift on the deck. He turned back to face the gathering and noticed the energy had changed again. Not celebratory, but not hollow either. A young executive, a black woman in a jade jumpsuit, stood near the bar, watching him. She raised her glass in silent solidarity. He nodded back. That, he thought, was the real toast. By now, the party had split into three kinds of people. Those who avoided Elijah entirely, lingering in shadows of their own discomfort. Those who suddenly wanted to be near him, offering handshakes and clumsy words like inspiring or courageous, as if the humiliation he endured was some noble lesson they were lucky to witness. And then, a few, just a few, who saw what had happened and said nothing, but were different now. You could see it in the way they looked at him. Not with fear, not with pity, but with respect they hadn't been taught to give before. One of those approached now. A woman in her early 60s, hair silvered and natural, her black evening dress understated, elegant. Mr. Maddox, she said quietly, I've sat on the board of 3 of the companies you fund. Tonight was the first time I realized how easily we all become accomplices to that kind of erasure. Elijah didn't speak. He let the silence invite her truth forward. She continued, You didn't just call her out. You called us in. I wanted you to know. I heard you. That mattered. Not everything needed to be public. Some reckonings had to happen person to person. He nodded. Thank you. The real change begins when you carry it into the rooms I'm not in. She offered a thin, genuine smile. I intend to. Behind them, the deck had found a new rhythm. Not quite celebratory, not quite solemn. Something else. Something in between. A quiet rebuilding. The hostess was gone, but the story of what she did lingered. And that was the thing about racism when it hides behind luxury. It only takes one voice to make it visible. One refusal to shrink. One presence that won't be erased. Elijah hadn't raised his voice, but the entire ship had heard him. Elijah's phone buzzed softly in his pocket. A message from the event coordinator. Just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know that was happening until it was too late. Camille has been removed from all future events. He read the message once, then slipped the phone away without replying. Accountability wasn't always swift, but sometimes it arrived just fast enough to be noticed. Nearby, a cluster of younger guests, mostly black and brown, had begun to gather near the bar. Not rowdy, not disruptive, just present, laughing now, but in a way that said we saw you stand your ground, and now we stand taller too. That was the part Camille hadn't counted on. She thought she was gatekeeping, but in trying to exclude one man, she'd exposed a door that needed tearing down. Elijah walked slowly through the deck now, stopping to greet people who approached with sincerity. A few asked questions about his firm, his values, how to partner, but others simply said thank you. That was new, not for the work he funded, not for the money he invested, but for the example he had just set. A young man in a navy suit stepped beside him, barely in his 20s, nerves written across his posture. I've studied your work for years, the man said, voice shaking slightly. But I didn't know, until tonight, how much courage that work takes outside the boardroom. Elijah smiled. That's the part no one teaches you. The rooms change, the faces change, but the assumptions? They linger. The young man nodded, jaw tight. I want to be where you are someday. Elijah looked him square in the eyes. Then remember this. Never let them make you small. Not in yachts. Not in offices. Not anywhere. The words landed, and somewhere beneath the low thrum of music, the boat kept moving forward. As the yacht sailed beneath a halo of soft lights and stars, Elijah drifted toward the upper deck, quiet now, away from the slow reanimation of the party below. The hum of conversation faded, replaced by the ocean's patient rhythm. He stood at the edge, gazing out. Not retreating, just breathing. Footsteps approached, measured, respectful. A man in his 50s, black, with graying temples and a quiet elegance, joined him at the railing. I knew your father, the man said without preamble. We were interns together at Harding and Fox in the 80s. He used to say his son would grow up sharper than him. Elijah's eyes softened. He never told me that. The man chuckled. Because he didn't want you walking into rooms expecting respect. He wanted you to command it. They stood in silence, side by side, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. You did more than that tonight, the man added. You showed them they couldn't define you. And you showed us, those of us who've had to bite our tongues for decades, that there's another way. Elijah nodded slowly. It's exhausting, isn't it? Always calculating how to exist in a space without being erased by it. The man exhaled. But tonight, you didn't shrink. You expanded the room. That, more than any apology, meant something. That this wasn't just a moment. It was a marker. For others. For those watching. For those wondering if they were next. Elijah turned back toward the lights of the lower deck. The laughter below was freer now. More diverse. More present. The energy had changed, not because of him, but because of what had been named and faced. He didn't want to be anyone's symbol, but he couldn't deny what had happened. A line had been drawn, and he hadn't flinched. Back on the main deck, the event's official host, Dominic Langford, a venture partner with a signature smile and a habit of skirting hard conversations, stepped onto a small platform near the bar. A mic in hand. The music dimmed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dominic began, his voice smooth but unusually tense. "Before we wrap tonight's event, I'd like to say a few words." Guests turned. Some curious, others wary. Elijah didn't move from where he stood above, but he watched. "I'd be remiss," Dominic continued, "if I didn't acknowledge what happened earlier this evening. What Mr. Maddox experienced should never happen, not at an event we host, not in any space we claim to curate." A pause. And while it may be tempting to treat that moment as a misunderstanding, it was more than that. It was a reflection, a revealing one. The crowd was silent. "I want to thank Mr. Maddox not just for his investment, but for his integrity. His refusal to shrink reminded us all that presence is not a privilege granted by others. It's a right." A few heads nodded. Some eyes flicked toward Elijah, now silhouetted against the stars. Dominic's voice steadied. "There are conversations we should have been having long before tonight. But we'll be having them now, with changes that go beyond optics. We owe that to every person who walks into our events expecting professionalism, respect, and equity." He stepped down. No applause. Just a quiet, solemn understanding that something had cracked open. Elijah watched from above, unmoved by theatrics, but aware that the ripple he set in motion was spreading. Not because of who he was, but because he refused to be invisible. As the final hour of the party wound down, the mood had shifted to something quieter, deeper. No longer just networking and deals. There was something else in the air now, an honesty. A reevaluation of what power looked like, and who had the right to claim space. Elijah descended the stairs back to the main deck. And this time, people didn't just see him. They made room. No awkward stares. No quiet avoidance. Just an awareness, a quiet current of respect that moved with him. And not the kind bought by wealth or status. The kind earned through dignity held firm in the face of dismissal. A woman in a flowing navy gown approached. Mid-40s, South Asian, her voice low but steady. "You changed how people will remember this night," she said. "And maybe how they show up in the next one." Elijah offered a nod. "I didn't come here to make a statement." "You didn't have to," she replied. "You made a truth undeniable." He glanced around. Where there had once been indifference, now there were small conversations, some uncomfortable, some energizing. White guests asking questions they wouldn't have dared an hour ago. Black and brown guests holding their heads a little higher, no longer shrinking to fit the space. A young man he hadn't seen before leaned in from the edge of the crowd. "This was the first time I saw someone not flinch when they tried to erase him." "Thank you." Elijah smiled gently. "You're welcome. Just make sure you do the same when it's your turn." Because there would be a next time. There always is. But now, the blueprint had shifted. As the yacht returned to the marina, the city skyline rose slowly on the horizon, lights twinkling like quiet witnesses to what had unfolded hours before. The crowd was thinner now. Some had left early, unable to sit with their discomfort. Others lingered, unwilling to let the night return to business as usual. Elijah stood near the bow, jacket off, tie loosened, breathing in the night air. Not triumphant, just resolute. A voice interrupted the hush, soft, familiar. It was the young executive from earlier, the one in the jade jumpsuit. "You think they'll remember this?" she asked, stepping beside him. Elijah didn't answer immediately. He looked out over the water, then said, "Some will. Others will pretend they didn't see it. But those who needed to see it most won't forget." She nodded, her gaze steady. "And what about you?" "I'll remember that I didn't let them define me," he said. "That I stood where I belonged. And made it clear I wasn't asking for permission." The yacht slowed as it neared the dock. Crew members prepared to help guests disembark. But Elijah lingered a moment longer. Because this wasn't just a story about humiliation. It was a story about reclamation. About what happens when dignity refuses to be bargained. About a man who didn't raise his voice, but raised the standard. And about a room full of people who finally had to confront what it meant to see. As Elijah stepped off the yacht, his presence still echoing behind him, one truth remained. Belonging isn't something granted. It's something declared. And sometimes, It's declared so powerfully, it changes the room forever. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.